Mara Salvatrucha, commonly known as MS-13, is an international criminal gang that originated in Los Angeles, California, in the 1980s. Originally, the gang was set up to protect Salvadoran immigrants from other gangs in the Los Angeles area. Over time, the gang grew into a more traditional criminal organization. MS-13 has a long-time rivalry with the 18th Street Gang. Many MS-13 members were deported to El Salvador after the end of the Salvadoran Civil War in 1992, or upon being arrested, facilitating the spread of the gang to Central America. The gang is currently active in many parts of the continental United States, Canada, Mexico, and Central America. Most members are Central American Salvadorans in particular. As an international gang, its history is closely tied to United States-El Salvador relations. In 2018, the gang's U.S. membership of up to 10,000 accounted for less than 1% of the 1.4 million gang members in the United States, and a similar share of gang murders. Description. Etymology. There is some dispute about the etymology of the name. Some sources state the gang is named for La Mara, a street in San Salvador, and the Salvatrucha guerrillas who fought in the Salvadoran Civil War. Additionally, the word Mara means gang in Caliche slang and is taken from marabunta, the name of a fierce type of ant. Salvatrucha may be a combination of the words Salvadoran and trucha, a Caliche word for being alert. The term Salvatruchas has been explained as a reference to Salvadoran peasants trained to become guerrilla fighters, referred to as the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. The 13 is believed to stand for the letter M, the 13th letter of the alphabet, but it is also rumored to pay homage to the Mexican Mafia prison gang. Characteristics. An MS gang sign and tattoos. Membership in Mara Salvatrucha consists primarily of Salvadorans and Salvadoran Americans, but also Hondurans, Guatemalans, Mexicans, and other Central and South Americans. 6 Central Americans are the primary targets of violence and threats of violence by MS-13. Many of the victims are minors. Minors also make up the majority of suspects arrested for killings attributed to MS-13. MS-13 gang members typically arrive the United States from Central America as unaccompanied minors. Many school districts receiving Central American migrants were reluctant to admit unaccompanied teenagers when they arrived from Central America, which left them at home and vulnerable to gang recruitment. Recruitment is often forced. In El Salvador, children are recruited while traveling to school, church, or work. Youth who are arrested for whatever reason are usually impressed into some gang or another during incarceration. MS-13 are notorious for their violence and a subcultural moral code based on merciless retribution. Aspirants are beaten for 13 seconds as an initiation to join the gang, a ritual known as a beat-in. At least one faction of MS-13, the Fulton clique in Los Angeles, has required prospective members to commit a murder in order to be considered for full-fledged membership. Mara Salvatrucha gang members are typically impoverished young men and teenagers, who are often homeless and estranged from family, and who subsist on minor drug dealing, theft and extortion of street vendors and other small-time criminals. MS-13 members use abandoned buildings in urban areas, known as destroyers, as places of residence and to host clandestine meetings, parties, and drug deals. Gang members who are employed usually work in the construction, restaurant, delivery service, and landscaping industries, presenting false documentation to employers. The gang is often public in its violence. Infanticide and femicide are common, with El Salvador hosting the third highest femicide rate in the world. In 2016, 1 in 5,000 Salvadoran women were killed. Legal impunity is a key factor. In femicide cases, only 5% result in convictions. Violent retributions target both enemy gangs as well as their families, friends, and neighbors. Entire families will be wiped out in a single attack, regardless of age. Buses full of passengers from the wrong parts of town will be burned in broad daylight, passengers still aboard. Police officers, government officials, and community organizations are frequent targets. Attacks like these have led the Supreme Court of El Salvador to authorize the classification of gangs as terrorist organizations. This cruelty of the distinguished members of the Maras or Mareros resulted in some being recruited by the Sinaloa cartel battling against Los Zetas in the Mexican drug war. Their wide-ranging activities have drawn the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, who have initiated wide-scale raids against known and suspected gang members, arresting hundreds across the United States. 34 In an interview with Bill Ritter in late 2017, Nassau County, New York District Attorney Madeline Singas, referring to crimes committed by MS-13 gang members, stated, "The crimes that we're talking about are brutal. Their weapon of choice is a machete. We end up seeing people with injuries that I've never seen before. You know, limbs hacked off. And that's what the bodies look like that we're recovering. So they're brutal. They're ruthless, and we're gonna be relentless in our attacks against them." The choice of a machete is in contrast to other gangs, which prefer to use guns. Officials state the gang has ambitions to become a national brand with an organization to match the Mafia or Mexican drug cartels and estimate its membership has grown by several thousand in the last decade, with a presence in 40 states. Many Mara Salvatrucha members cover themselves in tattoos, including the face. Common markings include MS, Salvatrucha, the devil horns, and the name of their clique. By 2007, the gang was moving away from face tattoos to make it easier to commit crimes without being noticed. Members of Mara Salvatrucha, like those of most modern American gangs, utilize a system of hand signs for purposes of identification and communication. One of the most commonly displayed is the devil's head, which forms an M when displayed upside down. This hand sign is similar to the symbol commonly displayed by heavy metal musicians and their fans. Founders of Mara Salvatrucha adopted the hand sign after attending concerts of heavy metal bands. Mara Salvatrucha has traditionally consisted of loosely affiliated cells known as cliques. MS-13 gangs in the United States are loosely affiliated with one another, and their specific activities are primarily determined by local circumstances. However, law enforcement officials have reported an increased coordination of criminal activity among the gang's cliques in the Atlanta, Dallas, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and New York metropolitan areas. In El Salvador, the gang is more centralized and cohesive. In 2002, several high-ranking MS-13 members began establishing the Renfla Nacional, the gang's command and control structure, which has directed acts of violence and murders in El Salvador and the United States. Presence. Locator map of countries and states with substantial presence of Mara Salvatrucha. Territories with strong presence. Territories with lighter presence. According to the 2009 National Gang Threat Assessment, Mara Salvatrucha is estimated to have 30,000 to 50,000 members and associate members worldwide, 8,000 to 10,000 of whom reside in the United States. 7 other estimates put it at around 30,000 members internationally. 43-44 Several thousand MS-13 gang members are believed to be in El Salvador's terrorism confinement center. MS-13 is one of the largest Hispanic street gangs operating in the United States. The gang has cliques in approximately 10 U.S. states, with activity in at least 42 states and the District of Columbia. Mara Salvatrucha has around 15 to 20 cliques active in Los Angeles, with the gang claiming parts of Westlake, Pico Union, Koreatown, East Hollywood, North Hollywood, Panorama City, and Van Nuys as its territory. 220 In New York, MS-13 is based primarily in the Woodhaven, Jamaica, Flushing and Rockaway areas of Queens, as well as on Long Island, according to one 2008 report. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, reported in 2008 that the highest threat from Mara Salvatrucha was in the western and northeastern U.S., coinciding with elevated Salvadoran immigrant populations in those areas. MS-13 activity in the southeast was increasing at the time due to an influx of gang members. 6 In early 2018, the district attorney for Nassau County, New York, stated that an investigation had uncovered a structured network of MS-13 operations in New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, Texas, from within a Mississippi prison cell, and in countries around the globe including Mexico, Colombia, Korea, France, Australia, Peru, Egypt, Ecuador, and Cuba. Mara Salvatrucha also operates in Central America and Mexico. The gang is strongest in Central America's northern triangle countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. In El Salvador, it is estimated that MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang employ some 60,000 between them, making them the largest employers in the country. Mara Salvatrucha expanded significantly in Mexico at the direction of Ranfla Nacional, the gang's board of directors. Robert Morales, a prosecutor for Guatemala, indicated in 2008 to the Globe and Mail that some Central American gang members were seeking refugee status in Canada. We know that there are members of Mara 18 and MS-13 who are in Canada and are seeking to stay there, and added, I came across a gang member who was working in a call center here. He'd just returned from a long stint in Ontario. We're hearing about Canada more and more often in connection with gang members here. Superintendent of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, Integrated Gang Task Force, John Robin, was quoted in the same article as saying, I think gang members have a feeling that police here won't treat them in the harsh manner they get down there. Robin noted that Canadian authorities want to avoid ending up like the US, which is dealing with the problem of Central American gangsters on a much bigger scale. In May 2018, Canadian federal authorities warned Canadian police services of gangs members attempting to flee the United States into Canada. Prior to a 2014 crackdown on the gang by the Spanish National Police Corps, MS-13 operated 5 cliques in Spain, located in Madrid, Girona, Barcelona, and Ibi. Mara Salvatrucha's operations in Spain were provided with financial and logistical support by the gang's El Salvador-based leadership as part of MS-13's expansionist agenda known as Programa 34, Program 34. History. The Mara Salvatrucha gang originated in Los Angeles, set up in the 1980s by Salvadoran immigrants in the city's Pico Union, Westlake, and Rampart neighborhoods who immigrated to the United States after the Central American Civil Wars of the 1980s. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Salvadoran asylum seekers were refused asylum in the U.S. and instead classified as undocumented immigrants. As such, Salvadorans began to immigrate without documents in increasing numbers. They mostly settled in cities with large undocumented populations, like Los Angeles. Salvadoran asylum claims were neglected until the 1991 case American Baptist Churches v. Thornburg. The case's settlement agreement required Guatemalan and Salvadoran asylum claims to be re-evaluated, as long as they had entered the U.S. by 1990. By this point, the Civil War was already drawing to a close after more than a decade of fighting. Before American Baptist Churches v. Thornburg and even after, Salvadoran immigrants were left highly vulnerable to exploitation. In the very beginning, MS-13 was a group of young, delinquent, heavy metal fans who lived in Los Angeles. However, the undocumented community in Los Angeles was subject to severe racial prejudices and persecution. Under these conditions, MS-13 began to mutate into a gang. Originally, the gang's main purpose was to protect Salvadoran immigrants from the other, more established gangs of Los Angeles, who were predominantly composed of Mexicans, Asians, and African Americans. Some of the original members of the MS-13 adhered to Satanism, and while the majority of contemporary MS-13 members do not identify as Satanists, the Satanist influence is still seen in some of their symbolism. The gang became a more traditional criminal organization under the auspices of Ernesto Deris. Deris was a former member of Salvadoran Special Forces, trained in Panama by United States Green Berets. On gaining leadership of an MS-13 clique in 1990, he used his military training to discipline the gang and improve its logistical operations. It was after this point that the gang began to grow in power. MS-13's rivalry with the 18th Street Gang also began in this period. MS-13 and 18th Street were initially friendly, since they were some of the only gangs to allow Salvadorans to join. What exactly caused their alliance to fall apart is uncertain. Most versions point to a fight over a girl in 1989. In the incident, an MS-13 gangster was killed, which led to a cycle of vengeance that has escalated into an intense and generalized animosity between the two gangs. Many MS-13 gang members from the Los Angeles area have been deported after being arrested. For example, Jose Abrego, a high-ranking member, was deported 4 times 58 as a result of these deportations. Members of MS-13 have recruited more members in their home countries. The Los Angeles Times contends that deportation policies have contributed to the size and influence of the gang both in the United States and in Central America. There was no significant gang activity in El Salvador until after MS-13 gangsters were deported there from Los Angeles. Large-scale deportations began shortly after the close of the Salvadoran Civil War in 1992. The war had lasted for more than 12 years and included the deliberate terrorizing and targeting of civilians by US-trained government death squads, including the targeting of prominent clergy from the Catholic Church. The war saw the recruitment of child soldiers and other human rights violations, mostly by the military, which left the country susceptible to gang infiltration. As a part of the Chapultepec Peace Accords, the post-war Salvadoran government was required to stop using the standing army as a police force and form a new national police service. However, the ruling political party, ARENA, was a descendant of the wartime military government. To favor military allies, it delayed the formation of the National Civil Police of El Salvador, PNC. When the PNC was finally organized in 1993, parts of the police force were created by integrating the armed forces. Some of the members of the nascent police force were known war criminals. The lack of a proper police force meant that deported gangsters faced little opposition when establishing MS-13 in El Salvador. To compound the issue, the post-war period was marked by the existence of a large number of uncontrolled arms left over from the conflict, which allowed MS-13 to become a significant arms trafficker. This remains one of its primary revenue sources today, alongside extortion and assassination. In addition, the economic struggles of the post-war period, alongside neoliberal trade reforms, likely contributed to the growth of MS-13. Attempts at suppression. Gang violence in El Salvador peaked in the 1990s, then declined in the early 2000s. Even so, they became a key part of political discourse. ARENA presidencies implemented the mano dura and super mano dura policies to combat gangs. External observers and gangsters themselves believe these policies increased the power of gangs in El Salvador. In 2004, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, created the MS-13 National Gang Task Force, which facilitates cooperation among local and state law enforcement agencies in order to dismantle MS-13. The strategies of the task force include the deportation of Salvatrucha members to their home countries, an effort which has instead exacerbated the gang problem by excelling its proliferation internationally. The mano dura policies were followed by a truce between MS-13 and their perpetual rivals, the 18th Street Gang. Under the direction of the President Mauricio Funes, the first Salvadoran president representing the FMLN party, government, and gang representatives negotiated unofficially. The terms required gangs to lower the homicide rate in exchange for transfers to lower security prisons. In addition, gangs would receive benefits from the government for every firearm they surrendered. While homicides fell during the truce, gangs no longer had to worry as much about turf wars. Instead, they focused on recruitment, organization, and extortion. The truce did not protect most Salvadorans from extortion. This, along with reports of government leniency towards imprisoned gangsters, led to the truce being highly unpopular and controversial. Funes' successor as the FMLN presidential candidate, Salvador Sánchez Cerén, campaigned on returning to a tough approach on gangs. After Sánchez Cerén took the presidency in 2014, the truce was understood to be over. Since the gang truce ended, the number of extrajudicial killings by police forces has grown dramatically. Throughout the truce, Salvadoran gangs were able to focus on expansion and internal regulation instead of inter-gang conflict. When the truce ended, the gangs had built up their forces significantly. As such, the truce breakdown saw a return to record levels of violence, with the gangs being much stronger and better organized than before. In 2015, El Salvador had the highest national homicide rate per capita in the world, largely due to escalating violence between MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang. Participants in the original truce negotiations have since been prosecuted. The trials revealed significant corruption, such as government negotiators encouraging gangs to increase the homicide rate to keep everyone at the negotiating table. Opposition to MS-13 in the U.S. has taken varied forms. In 2004, the FBI created the MS-13 National Gang Task Force 6465. The FBI also began cooperating with law enforcement in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, and set up its own office in San Salvador in February 2005. The following year, the FBI helped create a National Gang Information Center, NGIC, and outlined a national gang strategy for Congress 67. In addition, the Office of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement initiated Operation Community Shield. In 2008, the MS-13 task force coordinated a series of arrests and crackdowns in the U.S. and Central America that involved more than 6,000 police officers in 5 countries. 73 suspects were arrested in the U.S., in all, more than 650 were taken into custody. Citation needed. By 2011, this operation had made over 20,000 arrests, including more than 3,000 arrests of alleged MS-13 members. 68 In October 2012, the U.S. Treasury Department announced a freeze on American-owned assets controlled by the organization and listed MS-13 as a transnational criminal organization. 69 While the 3 leaders, José Luis Mendoza Figueroa, Eduardo Irazón Olasco, and Elmer Canales Rivera, were imprisoned in El Salvador, they continued to give orders. Elmer, being the founder of the 12 Apostles of the Devil Leadership Board 70. As a result, the U.S. Treasury Department imposed further sanctions in 2015, allowing the government to seize all assets controlled by these men. Any business with these leaders would be closed down. 71 In January 2016, over 400 Boston police officers were involved in the arrests of 37 MS-13 members, 56 were charged altogether. Weapons and funds were also seized at the homes of the gang members. Massachusetts State Police Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hughes commented in a public conference, "In my 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen a more violent gang out there. These are very, very violent individuals. The violence is unspeakable." The charges included immigration violations, racketeering, and firearm and drug trafficking. On November 16, 2017, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, officials announced that they arrested a total of 267 alleged MS-13 gang members and associates in Operation Raging Bull, which was carried out in 2 phases. The first phase was in September 2017, and resulted in 53 arrests in El Salvador. The second phase was between October 8 and November 11, 2017, and resulted in 214 arrests in the U.S. Charges included drug trafficking, child prostitution, human smuggling, racketing, and conspiracy to commit murder. On July 27, 2017, 113 suspected MS-13 gang members were arrested by Salvadoran authorities. On June 4, 2008, in Toronto, Ontario, police executed search warrants, made 21 arrests, and laid dozens of charges following a 5-month investigation. In January 2021, Acting United States Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen announced terrorism charges against 14 MS-13 leaders known as Renfla Nacional imprisoned in El Salvador. In June 2022, during the 2022 Salvadoran gang crackdown, one of the gang's leaders, Cesar Alfredo Romero Chavez, was sentenced to 1,090 years imprisonment in El Salvador after being convicted of 24 counts of aggravated homicide between 2017 and 2018. U.S. pursuit of Ulanadona y Arcagacarias. See also, Ulanadona y Arcagacarias. Photo of alleged MS-13 leader Ulanadona y Arcagacarias, alias Porky, distributed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On November 3, 2021, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issued a press release stating that Ulanadona y Arcagacarias was being added to the FBI's list of top 10 most wanted fugitives with a $100,000 reward for information leading to his capture. Arcagacarias is the alleged leader of MS-13 for all of Honduras. According to the FBI, Arcagacarias is charged federally in the Southern District of New York with racketeering conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy and possession, and conspiracy to possess machine guns. On February 8, 2023, the United States federal government ramped up pressure on Arcagacarias. The United States Department of State Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs offered a reward offer of $5 million USD through its Narcotics Rewards Program. The same day, the United States Department of the Treasury Office of Foreign Assets Control announced his sanctioning through placement on the specially designated nationals and blocked persons list pursuant to Executive Order 13,581. 2023 Most Wanted. In 2023, there are MS-13 members and associates besides Carias who are wanted by both the FBI and DHS. Each government agency is offering $10,000 for information leading to their arrest and conviction. They include Freddy Ivan Jandres Barata, Cesar Humberto Lopez Larios, Jorge Alexander de la Cruz, Juan Antonio Martinez Abrego, Francisco Javier Roman Bardales. Political discourse. MS-13 has been a theme in the Republican parties, in particular former President Donald Trump's, discourse during political campaigns and debates on immigration. Republicans have accused Democrats of being responsible for violence by MS-13 gangs and have called for stricter immigration policies to deal with MS-13. Republican politicians have argued that sanctuary cities, jurisdictions which do not prioritize enforcement of immigration law, contribute to MS-13 activity. However, studies on the relationship between sanctuary status and crime have found that either sanctuary policies do not affect crime or that they decrease crime rates. During the Trump administration, MS-13 became a top priority for the Department of Justice. Trump falsely claimed that towns had been liberated from MS-13 rule during his presidency 105-106 in 2018. Donald Trump's State of the Union address included Evelyn Rodriguez, the mother of a child who was slain by MS-13 members. 107 Rodriguez died soon after from a non-MS-13 related case. 108 Trump also falsely claimed on multiple occasions that his administration had deported thousands and thousands of MS-13 gang members. 109-110 In justifying the Trump administration's implementation of a family separation policy of migrants accused of crossing the border illegally, Kirstjen Nielsen, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, said that child migrants were being used by MS-13 to cross the US-Mexico border. There is no evidence that MS-13 members have falsely claimed custodianship of children crossing the US border. A number of Republican politicians, including President Trump, have falsely accused Democrats of supporting MS-1 for shielding MS-13 gang members from deportation. In the United States, there were an estimated 10,000 MS-13 gang members in 2018, showing stable membership numbers for more than a decade. The gang accounts for less than 1% of total gang members in the United States, 1.4 million according to FBI data, and a similar share of gang murders. However, an FBI assessment has reported that Sereno gangs, including Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, 18th Street, and Florencia 13, are expanding faster than other national-level gangs, both in membership and geographically. The Trump administration has stated that there is a surge in MS-13 gang members and that weak immigration enforcement contributes to greater MS-13 crime activity. There has been no evidence to corroborate either of those claims. Publicized crimes. Mara Salvatrucha members are involved in the trafficking of narcotics, primarily cocaine and marijuana, into the United States, as well as the transportation and distribution of illicit drugs throughout the U.S. Conversely, the gang is engaged in the trafficking of stolen vehicles from the U.S. to Central America. MS-13 also utilizes intimidation and violence to extort payment from legal and illegal businesses operating in its territory. 9 members partake in additional criminal activities including alien smuggling, weapons trafficking, assault, homicide, rape, kidnapping, identification theft, home invasions, carjackings, prostitution, robbery, and vandalism. MS-13 is affiliated with the Sereno coalition of gangs which pay tribute to the Mexican Mafia. The gang has colluded with the Mexican Mafia in drug trafficking. Salvatrucha leaders in Mexico have brokered deals with the Zetas, Gulf, Jalisco New Generation, and Sinaloa cartels in order to obtain narcotics and firearm. As of 2007, the gang was being violent to migrants on the southern border of Mexico. MS-13's biggest rival internationally is the 18th Street Gang. Other rival gangs include the Bloods and the Latin Kings. Infighting among Salvatrucha cliques has also taken place. Case. On July 13, 2003, Brenda Paz, a 17-year-old former MS-13 member turned informant, was found stabbed to death on the banks of the Shenandoah River in Virginia. She was 4 months pregnant at the time, prior to being killed for informing the FBI about Salvatrucha's criminal activities. 2 of her former friends were later convicted of the murder. On December 23, 2004, one of the most widely publicized MS-13 crimes in Central America occurred in Caliche, Honduras, when an intercity bus was intercepted and sprayed with automatic gunfire from assault rifles. 132 killing 28 and wounding 14 civilian passengers, most of whom were women and children. MS-13 organized the massacre as a protest against the Honduran government for proposing a restoration of the death penalty in Honduras. 6 gunmen raked the bus with gunfire. As passengers screamed and ducked, another gunman climbed aboard and methodically executed passengers. 134 in February 2007, Juan Carlos Miranda Buso and Darwin Alexis Ramirez were found guilty of several crimes, including murder and attempted murder. Ebert Anibal Rivera was arrested over the attack after fleeing to Texas. Juan Bautista Jimenez, accused of masterminding the massacre, was killed in prison. According to the authorities, fellow MS-13 inmates hanged him. There was insufficient evidence to convict Oscar Fernando Mendoza and Wilson Giovanni Gomez. An MS-13 suspect bearing gang tattoos is handcuffed. On May 13, 2006, Ernesto Smokey Miranda, a former high-ranking soldier and one of the founders of Salvatrucha, was murdered at his home in El Salvador a few hours after declining to attend a party for a gang member who had just been released from prison. He had begun studying law and working to keep children out of gangs. On June 6, 2006, 138, a teenage MS-13 gang member named Gabriel Granillo was stabbed to death at Irvin Chu Park in the Neartown district in Houston, Texas. Chris Vogel of the Houston Press wrote that the trial of the girl who stabbed Granillo, Ashley Page Benton 140, gave attention to MS-13. If you like this video, please like, comment about your thoughts on this, subscribe and click the bell icon for further notifications.